you'd mentioned that a major strategy of the 9.1 poets is parataxis, which is, my understanding, the, sorry, based on my understanding, it's grammatically equivalent details.
Yep.
So I guess they're questioning hierarchy and ordering and all that. So if that's their major strategy, then when a poet like Silliman or Perelman starts accumulating all these paratactic details, I'm wondering whether they're thinking about the order, whether they accumulate details as they come, or whether there's a lot of revision going on. Because I'm thinking of a poem like Albany, and it's interesting to me, the first quote-unquote sentence or fragment is a dependent clause, and I think it's a great way to open the poem. And I'm just wondering to what extent someone like Silliman feels that the order is arbitrary, or whether he's very conscious about the ordering.
So who wants to... Thank you, Jose. We're going to stay on the line, stay on the phone. We might get back to you, but let's see where we can go with this. Max, do you have a thought on this?
I think it's a really interesting question, Jose. I think it's hard to speak exactly to Silliman's process, but I think we can say this much for sure, that when Silliman, when he writes Albany, for instance, and he's trying to write about his life, he doesn't go back to some sort of arbitrary beginning and then sort of work forward. He does more of a, he's more taking notes, associating, and then that sort of leads to the paratectic end that we get.
Anna, your thought?
I guess what makes the whole kind of paratactic technique, if we can call it that, so interesting for me is just the way that you have all of these kind of equivalent details, and then based on maybe like who you are, what your particular experience of the poem is at that moment, something is going to jump out at you, and then you're just going to keep going right through the rest of the poem, and then something else will jump out at you. I just think that makes it such an interesting reading experience.
And as a technical answer to your question, or one part of your question, we might ask about how Lynn Heginian arranged her sentences in each section. The fact is that the sentences, both in some sections, came as they occurred to her, but temporally and from different places, right? So you had the Lynn Heginian at 38 years old, thinking about a sentence that a 38-year-old would say of the 5-year-old, and then you have the 5-year-old's a memory of what the 5-year-old would have said, and you mix those things together. And then they're spatially strewn, because sometimes she'll write them in the sequence of composition, sometimes she will write them in that sequence as it occurs to her, and then scramble it later. And then when she gets to a later edition, when she's 45-year-old, she will then insert, what does she need? 7 new sentences or something like that. So she'll create 7 new sentences and insert them anywhere. So you get, right there, I've just described 3 ways in which the sequencing is not really sequenced. I never did ask Ron Silliman how he organized the 100. My guess is that he wrote a series of them, and then he scrambled them, and then he looked at it, and he probably did some revising of the sequence. I'm a list maker, Jose. Do you make lists?
Yeah. I tend to. Yeah.
I'm a big list maker, and I think a lot of us are. And the list is not ordered. It's usually in order of how I thought about it. And I usually handwrite them, even though I'm not really a handwriting guy. And later, when I make some kind of order out of this list of things I have to do, that would be the equivalent of the end product of narrativizing what I have to do. But the unordered list reminds me of the thought that Bob Perelman had about Leland Hickman's impending death. He simply wanted to say the things that occurred to him and then leave each one of them open-ended. And so there is no discernible order except that you imagine someone thinking about this impending death. So let's take one quatrain of that. I guess this might be the last one. Come what may, it can't. There are a number of, but there is only one. That's why I want to. Now, one can see that as the final four things that he said to Lee Hickman. I mean, it really does have that finality of it, even though it's open-ended. But it also could be simply four of the many, many things that he thought of or said. Come what may, it can't. There are a number of, but there is only one. That's why I want to. Even the way I read that, with all the emotion I'm trying to give it, even if it's a little random, I can make the ending sound like ending, but there's no determined way for me to understand that as ending. So the key word here to answer your question is subordination. I think that there is a refusal, and these people, the language writers, more than the 9.2 poets, I think thought of themselves as, Ron Silliman certainly, as political radicals as well as aesthetic radicals. I think that Ron Silliman wanted to see the established order somewhat upended. And so subordination is a way of a non-democracy of thoughts and sentences and expressions. And so to take all the subordination out and leave paratactic arrangements for him was a part of his rebellion. Jose, does it strike you as, do you feel like the rebellion is sufficient? Do you feel like you're being liberated from hierarchy and subordination and order? I know that you don't want to teach this to your kids necessarily without some context.
Well, I just found it interesting that the first line or the first sentence of the first 9.1 poet's poem is a subordinate clause, and
well, it's not subordinated though. It's sitting out there as the kind of clause we usually get in that situation. But it's if what? What's the line?
If the function of writing is to express the world.
To express the world, yeah. So it's just sitting out there. Yeah. So it's unsubordinated, subordinated. What do you think it means?
I like what Ron said in the forums. There's this sense of squeezing out. It's also it also hints at the idea of expression, the idea of communication, and yet the rest of the poem kind of resists that, or kind of challenges our idea of coherence and directness.